This is the intriguing love story of a multi-billionaire, resilient, proud young doctor, Tudor. He decided to spend his money on research in a rural kingdom a few weeks before his wedding. Events that hit him left his fate in the hands of a poor orphan who he must obey to survive. Please like, subscribe, and share.
The air felt heavy as Dr. Tudor drove into Okia kingdom. The dense foliage surrounding the narrow dirt road whispered ancient secrets, the kind that made even the bravest men wary. His truck, packed to the brim with supplies, jolted with every bump on the uneven track, the hum of the engine blending with the distant calls of unseen creatures. Tudor adjusted his glasses and glanced at the GPS mounted on his dashboard. The screen flickered briefly before giving up entirely. Technology was unreliable this far from the city. He sighed, gripping the steering wheel tighter, and focused on the dusty trail ahead. Fiona's words echoed in his mind, sharp and disapproving. "Why do you need this trip, Tudor? You're already successful. What's the point of risking your life in some backwater kingdom for a research project?" But Tudor had insisted. This wasn't just about his career. It was about making a difference, solving a mystery that had baffled the region for years. Dr. Tudor spotted the palace gates as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long golden shadows over the rugged terrain. The gates, tall and ornate with ancient carvings, stood open, flanked by two guards wielding spears. They eyed his truck with suspicion as he approached, their expressions unreadable beneath tribal markings etched into their faces. Tudor parked the truck and stepped out, adjusting his crisp white shirt. The contrast between his polished city attire and the rustic surroundings was stark, but he held his ground, exuding an air of quiet confidence. "I am Dr. Tudor," he announced, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his chest. "I have an appointment with His Majesty, King Dampa Dampa III. The guards exchanged glances before one gestured toward the main doors of the palace. Tudor nodded in gratitude and began his ascent up the stone steps, his heartbeat quickening with anticipation. Inside, the palace was a blend of grandeur and decay. Intricately woven tapestries adorned the walls, telling stories of past glories and battles. Yet there was an air of neglect, cracks in the walls, faint traces of mildew. It was as if the building itself bore the scars of the kingdom's turmoil. Tudor was led into the throne room, a vast space dominated by a raised platform where King Dampa Dampa III sat. The king was a formidable figure, his posture regal despite the weariness in his eyes. He was flanked by advisors, their faces grim as they murmured among themselves. "Your Majesty," Tudor said, bowing slightly, "I am honored to be in your presence. I have come to assist your people and study the ailment affecting the elderly in your kingdom." King Dampa nodded slowly, his gaze piercing. "We welcome your expertise, Doctor," he replied, his voice deep and resonant. "But I must warn you, our kingdom is not what it once was. There are those who oppose any form of Western intervention, believing it a threat to our traditions." Before Tudor could respond, the heavy wooden doors of the throne room burst open with a thunderous crash. A man stormed in, his presence commanding and menacing. Busse. His towering frame and wild, unkempt hair made him a terrifying sight. He was surrounded by loyalists, their weapons gleaming ominously under the dim light of the chamber. "You dare bring an outsider into our sacred land?" Kabusa roared, his voice echoing like a war cry. "This is an insult to our ancestors." He pressed on, his hands trembling as he pushed aside low-hanging branches. A sudden rustle nearby made him freeze. His eyes darted around, straining to pierce the shadows. Was it an animal? Or worse, one of Kabusa's men? Chaos erupted as Kabusa's men charged forward, clashing with the palace guards. Tudor barely had time to react before King Dampa's advisors ushered him toward a side exit. "Go now," one of them hissed. "If Kabusa captures you, your mission, and your life will be over." Tudor ran, his heart pounding as the sounds of battle filled the air. He slipped through the narrow passageways of the palace, the walls seeming to close in on him. Finally, he burst into the open night, the jungle looming ahead like an impenetrable fortress. With no time to think, he plunged into the darkness, the cries of Kabusa's men fading as the dense underbrush swallowed him whole. The jungle was alive with sound, an orchestra of rustling leaves, distant howls, and the incessant hum of insects. Dr. Tudor stumbled forward, his legs trembling under the weight of exhaustion. The darkness was suffocating, pierced only by the faint light of the moon filtering through the thick canopy above. He gritted his teeth, pushing past thorny bushes that clawed at his skin, leaving angry red scratches. Each step felt heavier than the last, the air thick with humidity. His crisp shirt was now damp and clinging to his body, a far cry from the pristine image he had projected at the palace. Behind him, faint shouts echoed in the distance. Kabusa's men were still searching, their torches casting ominous glows in the far-off trees. Tudor's breath hitched as he crouched low, his heart pounding like a war drum. "Think, Tudor," he muttered to himself. "You're not a soldier, but you're resourceful. You've handled pressure before. This is no different." But it was different. The stakes here weren't a delayed surgery or a difficult diagnosis. They were life and death. The sound grew louder, closer. Tudor held his breath, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, low to the ground. "A wild dog." The creature snarled, baring its teeth as it crept closer, its muscles coiled like a spring ready to pounce. Tudor's mind raced. He scanned the ground and found a sturdy branch. Gripping it tightly, he swung as the dog lunged, the impact sending the animal yelping into the underbrush. Tudor staggered back, his makeshift weapon still in hand. He didn't wait to see if the animal would return. His survival instincts kicked in, driving him deeper into the jungle. As hours passed, the jungle seemed endless, an unyielding maze of trees and shadows. Tudor's legs burned, his throat parched. Just as despair began to creep in, he saw it, a faint, flickering light in the distance. Hope surged through him, lending strength to his weary body. He moved toward the light, careful not to make noise. As he drew closer, the outline of a small hut came into view, its warm glow promising shelter and safety. Tudor hesitated, peering through the foliage. Inside, the silhouette of a woman moved gracefully, her long hair catching the light. She seemed so out of place in this harsh wilderness, like a mirage conjured by his desperate mind. For a moment he stood frozen, torn between relief and caution. But the distant shouts of Kabus's men brought him back to reality. He had no choice. Gathering what little courage he had left, Tudor stepped forward, his voice trembling as he called out, "Hello. Please, I mean no harm. I just need a place to rest." The light inside the hut dimmed as the woman moved toward the door. When it creaked open, Tudor was met with the most enchanting sight he had ever seen. Manaria stood there, her piercing eyes studying him with suspicion. She held a knife in her hand, her stance defensive but poised. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady but wary. "My name is Tudor," he said, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I'm a doctor. I was at the palace when it was attacked. I have nowhere else to go." Manaria's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You're not one of them." "No," Tudor assured her. "I'm here to help your people, not harm them. Please, I just need a safe place to rest." For a long moment, Manaria said nothing, her eyes searching his face for signs of deceit. Finally, she lowered the knife. "Come in," she said quietly. "But don't think for a second that I trust you." Tudor nodded, stepping inside the hut. The warmth of the small space enveloped him, and for the first time since the chaos began, he felt a sliver of hope. The hut was modest but clean, a testament to its occupants' resourcefulness. A small fire crackled in the corner, casting dancing shadows on the mud walls. A single wooden bed stood to one side, its thin mattress neatly made. Shelves made of rough-hewn wood held an assortment of clay pots, dried herbs, and tools Tudor couldn't identify. Manaria closed the door behind him, securing it with a wooden latch. She turned, her knife still within reach, and motioned for him to sit on a low stool near the fire. Tudor obeyed, sinking onto the stool with a sigh of relief. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found this place." Manaria said nothing, her sharp eyes scanning him. Her beauty was striking, almost otherworldly. She was young, likely in her early 20s, with smooth, fair skin that seemed to glow in the firelight. Her long black hair fell in waves down her back, framing a face that was both delicate and fierce. "Who are you really?" she asked finally, crossing her arms. "And why are you here?" Tudor met her gaze, sensing that honesty was his best chance. "I'm Dr. Tudor. I'm from the city, a medical researcher. I came to your kingdom to study a strange illness that's affecting the elderly. It's part of my work, but it's also personal. I want to make a difference, to help people." Manaria's expression softened, but her guard didn't drop entirely. She sat down across from him, her knife now resting on her lap. "My parents died because of that illness," she said, her voice quieter now, tinged with pain. "It starts slow, weakness, fatigue. Then the body wastes away until there's nothing left." Tudor leaned forward, his professional curiosity piqued despite his exhaustion. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said sincerely. "How long ago did it happen?" 3 years, she replied. "They were strong, healthy people. Then one day my father fell sick. A month later he was gone. My mother followed soon after. No one here knows what causes it or how to stop it. That's why I'm here," Tudor said. "I brought equipment with me. Tools to help me understand the disease, to find a cure." Manaria tilted her head, studying him again. And you thought you could just stroll into our kingdom, talk to the king and fix everything. You don't understand what it's like here. I'm starting to see that, Tudor admitted, thinking of Kabussa's attack. But I didn't come here to impose. I came to learn, to work with your people. If I can help even one family avoid what you went through, it will be worth it. Her gaze lingered on him, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of trust in her eyes. You're brave, she said, almost reluctantly. Or foolish. Kabussa won't stop hunting you. He sees you as a threat, a symbol of everything he hates. Tudor sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I figured as much. But I can't leave without doing what I came here to do. Will you help me? Manaria hesitated, her fingers brushing the knife on her lap. I don't know you, Doctor, but you seem different from the others who've come here. You don't look at us like we're beneath you. Because you're not, Tudor said firmly. Her lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. I'll think about it. For now you can stay. But if you bring danger to my doorstep, I won't hesitate to send you back into the jungle. Tudor nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. Thank you, Manaria. I'll do my best to prove that I'm not a threat. She rose, placing the knife on a nearby table. You should rest, she said. There's a blanket over there. Use it. As she turned away, Tudor felt a pang of something he couldn't quite define. Gratitude, admiration. He wasn't sure. But one thing was certain. This young woman, alone in the wilderness, was far more than she appeared to be. The first rays of dawn seeped through the gaps in the hut's thatched roof, painting streaks of gold across the earthen floor. Tudor stirred, his body aching from the unfamiliar hardness of the ground. Despite the discomfort, he felt more rested than he had since arriving in Okia. He sat up, catching sight of Manaria. She was crouched near the fire, grinding some dried herbs into a fine powder with practiced precision. Her movements were swift and efficient, her face calm but focused. Good morning, Tudor said, his voice still groggy. Manaria glanced at him, her expression neutral. Morning. She pointed to a small clay cup beside her. I made some tea. It's not much, but it will help you feel stronger. Tudor picked up the cup, its warmth seeping into his hands. He sipped the tea, the bitter taste tempered by a hint of sweetness. Thank you, he said. This is good. Manaria didn't reply. Instead, she stood and began packing a small cloth bag with tools and supplies. Tudor watched her for a moment before speaking again. What's the plan? Manaria tied the bag shut and slung it over her shoulder. You said you need to get to your truck, right? That's where your equipment is. Tudor nodded. Then we'll move before Kabussa's men start searching again, she continued. I know the paths they won't take. But it won't be easy. I didn't expect it to be, Tudor said, rising to his feet. Whatever it takes, I'm ready. Manaria raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk playing on her lips. We'll see. The jungle was alive with the sounds of morning as the two set out. Manaria led the way, her footsteps light and deliberate, barely disturbing the undergrowth. Tudor followed closely, doing his best to mimic her movements but occasionally stumbling on roots or uneven ground. Stay quiet, she whispered over her shoulder. Sound travels far here. If Kabussa's men hear us. She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Tudor nodded, his heart pounding as he forced himself to move carefully. They had been walking for nearly an hour when Manaria suddenly stopped, raising a hand to signal silence. Tudor froze, his ears straining to catch what she had heard. Voices, faint but distinct, coming from somewhere ahead. Manaria crouched low, motioning for Tudor to do the same. They crept forward until they reached a thicket overlooking a narrow path. 3 of Kabussa's men stood there, their weapons gleaming in the sunlight as they spoke in low tones. "We'll patrol the southern paths today," one of them said. The stranger couldn't have gotten far. "Kabussa wants him alive for now." Tudor's stomach churned at the words, but Manaria remained calm, her sharp eyes scanning the area. She tugged lightly on his sleeve, pulling him back into the cover of the bushes. "We'll take a different route," she whispered. They veered off the main path, moving deeper into the jungle. The detour was more treacherous, with dense foliage and hidden pitfalls that made progress slow and exhausting. Tudor struggled to keep up, his city-born body ill-suited to the rugged terrain. At one point, his foot caught on a root, and he fell heavily, the sound echoing louder than it should have. Manaria spun around, her eyes wide with alarm. "Careful," she hissed, helping him up. "Sorry," Tudor muttered, brushing dirt off his hands. "I'm not exactly built for this." "You'll have to be," she said curtly. "Out here, one mistake can get us killed." Tudor nodded, chastened, and they pressed on. By mid-afternoon they reached a small stream. Manaria knelt by the water, filling a wooden bowl she had carried in her bag. "Drink," she said, handing the bowl to Tudor. He drank deeply, the cool water a welcome relief. As he handed the bowl back, he noticed Manaria studying him. "You're not like the others who've come here," she said finally. Tudor raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The missionaries, the traders, they come with promises but they only take. You're different." Tudor hesitated, unsure how to respond. I want to help. That's all." Manaria nodded, though her expression remained guarded. "We'll see if your actions match your words." As they rested by the stream, Tudor couldn't help but feel a growing respect for this young woman who had so willingly taken on the burden of guiding him through her perilous world. She was more than just a survivor. She was a warrior in her own right. "Got it." The jungle's stillness felt oppressive as Tudor and Manaria pressed on, their steps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves. Suddenly, Manaria stopped, her body tensing as she motioned for Tudor to stay quiet. "What is it?" Tudor whispered, his voice barely audible. Manaria tilted her head, listening. A faint sound, a snapping twig, reached their ears, followed by low voices. "It's Kabussa's men," she murmured, her tone calm but urgent. "We need to hide." Tudor's pulse quickened as Manaria grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a cluster of vines hanging from a large tree. She crouched, guiding him into a hollow formed by the tree's massive roots. "Stay here," she whispered. "I'll distract them." Tudor shook his head, panic rising. "You can't." "I know these paths," she interrupted, her voice steady. "I won't let them find you. Trust me." Before Tudor could argue further, Manaria disappeared into the foliage. He pressed himself deeper into the hollow, the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Manaria moved quietly through the jungle, her knowledge of the terrain guiding her steps. She picked up a sturdy branch and used it to sweep the ground, creating a false trail leading away from Tudor's hiding place. Not far away, Caboos's men were searching, their machetes slashing through the undergrowth. "He couldn't have gone far," one of them grumbled. "The girl must be helping him." Manaria's heart clenched at their words, but she kept her focus. Finding a large rock, she picked it up and hurled it into the bushes opposite her. The noise startled the men, and they turned sharply. "Over there!" one shouted, running toward the sound. Manaria slipped back toward Tudor's hiding spot, her steps light and deliberate. She found him crouched in the hollow, his face pale but determined. "They're gone for now," she whispered, helping him out of the hollow. "How did you?" Tudor began, but Manaria shook her head. "No time. We need to keep moving." They navigated the jungle in tense silence, every rustle of leaves or distant cry of a bird setting their nerves on edge. Tudor couldn't help but marvel at Manaria's composure. Despite the danger, her voice remained calm, her movements deliberate. When they stopped to catch their breath, Tudor finally spoke. "How are you so calm? Don't you ever get scared?" Manaria hesitated, her eyes scanning the jungle as if searching for an answer. "I've been scared every day since my parents died," she admitted. "But fear doesn't help you survive. You have to stay focused." Tudor nodded, her words resonating with him. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you're doing." Manaria gave him a faint smile, her first since they met. "Just stay alive. That'll be thanks enough." The jungle seemed to stretch endlessly before them, its tangled paths and dense foliage creating a labyrinth where even the faintest misstep could spell disaster. Tudor followed closely behind Manaria, his trust in her growing with every careful step she took. She moved gracefully, her bare feet finding purchase on uneven ground as though the forest had molded itself to her movements. Tudor, on the other hand, stumbled over roots and swatted away stubborn branches, feeling every bit the outsider he was. "You're not used to this, are you?" Manaria asked, glancing back at him with a faint smile. "Not even a little," Tudor admitted, brushing leaves from his hair. "My idea of the outdoors is a neatly trimmed hospital garden." Manaria chuckled softly, her laughter a brief reprieve from the tension of their journey. "Well, we're far from that now." They reached a shallow stream, its crystal-clear water trickling over smooth stones. Manaria knelt and filled a small wooden bowl from her bag, offering it to Tudor. "Drink," she said. "You need to stay hydrated." Tudor took the bowl gratefully, his thirst overpowering any hesitation. "Do you always carry this with you?" he asked, gesturing to the bowl. "Always," Manaria replied. "The jungle is unpredictable. You have to be prepared for anything." Tudor studied her as she refilled the bowl for herself. Her calm demeanor, her resourcefulness. It was hard not to admire her. Here she was, navigating a world full of dangers he could barely comprehend, yet she remained steadfast. As they moved on, the path became steeper, the ground shifting beneath their feet. Tudor struggled to keep his balance, his arms flailing as he slipped on loose soil. Manaria caught his arm, steadying him. "Careful," she said. "The ground here is unstable." "Thanks," Tudor said, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I'm not exactly built for this." "That's obvious," Manaria teased, her tone light. "But you're trying, and that counts for something." They continued in silence for a while, the air between them growing more comfortable. Tudor couldn't help but notice the way Manaria's hair caught the sunlight, the way her soft voice blended seamlessly with the sounds of the jungle. "Manaria," he said suddenly, "why are you helping me? You could have turned me away, or worse, handed me over to Kabussa's men." Manaria paused, her gaze distant. "When I lost my parents to the sickness, I thought I'd lost everything," she said quietly. "But then I realized that helping others, even in small ways, gave me a purpose. You came here to help, and I could see you were genuine. That's why I chose to help you." Tudor nodded, her words resonating deeply. "I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found you." "You'd have figured something out," Manaria said with a small smile. "But maybe not as quickly." The jungle began to thin out, and the faint smell of gasoline reached Tudor's nose. He perked up, recognizing the scent. "My truck," he said, excitement creeping into his voice. Manaria held up a hand, her expression cautious. "It might not be safe." They crept closer, keeping low. Through the trees, Tudor spotted the truck parked haphazardly in a small clearing. Relief flooded him, until he noticed the figures moving around it. 3 of Kabussa's men were rummaging through the truck's contents, their loud voices carrying through the trees. "Looks like he left in a hurry," one of them said, holding up a medical kit. "Find anything useful?" another asked. "Just supplies," the first replied. "But Kabussa won't care. He wants the man, not his things." Tudor clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath his fear. "They're looting everything," he whispered. Manaria placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding. "We'll wait until they leave," she said. "There's no point risking a confrontation." Tudor nodded reluctantly, his admiration for her growing yet again. Her calm in the face of danger, her ability to think clearly under pressure. It was something he could only aspire to. As they crouched in the underbrush, Tudor found himself glancing at Manaria more often than the men by the truck. She was a puzzle, soft-spoken yet resilient, gentle yet unwavering. In a world that had given her every reason to turn bitter, she had chosen compassion. And for the first time since arriving in Okia, Tudor felt a glimmer of hope. With Manaria by his side, maybe, just maybe, they would survive this ordeal together.